I'm Chris Terranova, and this is the Generational Exchange. 4 generations, one conversation. The business world is a tapestry woven from different threads. The experience of seasoned veterans, the tech-savvy energy of the younger generation, and everything in between. In this podcast, we'll unravel those threads, explore the unique perspectives from panelists in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s on today's business challenges. By bringing together these unique voices, we hope to spark new ideas, bridge the generation gap, and equip listeners with a well-rounded approach to navigating the ever-evolving business landscape. Well, you can tell by that read that it's a little rusty because it's been a little while since we've gotten the band back together, but here we are. It's always good to see my friends and panel. Good afternoon, good evening, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Hello, sir. Good to be back.
As usual, we have our band of merry men. I'm just going to go down my camera today. First off is the lovely and talented Mark Russell, who is representing someone in their 60s. Good evening, Mark.
Good day.
And next we have Rhett Suchu, who is representing someone in their 30s, and he's sporting a sassy new haircut. Look at
Hello,
that,
sir.
sharp as a tack. Good evening.
You're too kind, really.
And then, of course, the handsomest of us all is Jeremy Davidson, who is representing someone in their 40s. Good evening, my friend.
If I could pull off the collared shirt and the sweater vest, I'd be rocking that. So.
That's right. I look like I golf. That's
color
all I
me
do.
jealous.
I play a golfer on TV.
Good to be back.
And I am your ever faithful host, Chris Terranova. I represent someone in the 50s. So not the 1950s, but in the age of 50s. So we're back. We're getting started. It's very exciting. Today's topic is a really interesting one, and it's about the value of understanding your team's strengths and where you can optimize their talent and contributions that lead to your team and organizational goals. What we're going to be talking about today is how, if you invest in your leadership development and your coaching and professional development, your organization can cultivate a high-performing workforce, build a strong leadership pipeline, and achieve long-term success. Of course, another part of that equation is also when and if and how you optimize the experience of an outside coach versus what you as a manager need to provide every day. All of us have some experience with that. So we're going to be going through the value of some of those things. Hopefully we'll all learn a little bit as we go. But as usual, we're going to be providing some benefits. I'm sure we will come across some things not to do. And we'll wrap it up in a nice bow at the end. But without further ado, we'll get started. So one of the first topics we're going to talk about is the value of leadership development, coaching, and professional development. So we all, probably from a business perspective, have invested in this for a long time. And we know that they are essential investments in the organization's human capital. They do offer a lot of benefits, both individually and to the company as a whole. We've got a list of some business leadership development coaching. I'm going to go through these maybe one at a time. And gents, we can either talk to them as a group or maybe stop along the trail, but you tell me how you'd like to approach those.
Yeah, let's run down through that list.
Run through the list?
Yeah.
All right. So some of the benefits of leadership development coaching are enhanced self-awareness. Coaches help leaders identify their strengths, weaknesses, and blind spots, leading to greater self-understanding. There's also improved decision-making. Coaches can sharpen their critical thinking, problem-solving, and decision-making abilities. It provides effective communication. Leaders learn to communicate clearly, persuasively, and empathetically. It leads to increased emotional intelligence. Coaches help leaders develop empathy, build stronger relationships, and manage emotions effectively. It leads to accelerated growth. Coaches provide focused support and accountability, leading to faster career progression. And last but not least, it also leads to boosted confidence. Through coaching, leaders gain confidence in their abilities and leadership style. That was a mouthful, right? But I think overall, it kind of gives you an overview of what leadership coaching can draw from and lead to. But Mark, you've been a leadership coach. You've been my leadership coach. You've done this for years. Why don't we start off with you on this one?
All right. Thank you, Chris. So I guess a couple of things. Number one, a lot of these are management principles 101. And again, it's not a podcast if I don't quote a Gallup statistic. So in essence, Gallup will say that 70% of all employees will leave an organization mostly because of their direct manager. And so that level of engagement is directly attributed from that. And in a lot of cases, what I hear from folks and even previous engagements with a company near and dear to all of our hearts, a lot of it said, we didn't have leadership. We didn't have management training. Yes, there might have been some nice out of the box, courses that could be taken. There are a lot of good companies that put in a lot of effort and, time in doing those things. But yet, how do you make it applicable to their job? It's just like when you onboard, HR is there day one, hour 1 and 2, giving you all the benefit information, all the forms that you have to fill out. But do they really talk about why it's important that you are here with us? And here are the attributes that you had that we hired you for from that perspective. So I think, really boiling it down, there's a couple of things that when the managers can get that one-on-one engagement from someone other than their own manager. This past weekend, I had an in-depth conversation with a professor from the University of Denver, and we got into this whole leadership conversation. And even without prompting her, she said, the one thing that I see, especially when we're working with business leaders to make sure our students are ready, a lot of those leaders don't want to show vulnerability. Mm-hmm. And, Lencioni will say vulnerability is a strength. It's not a weakness. So I think that's one of the elements. Secondly, we've talked about this before too. Sometimes managers are promoted for the wrong reasons. They were the rock star individual contributor. Right. They've been there for a long time. The company doesn't want to lose them, so let's promote them in the management. Or it becomes a compensation issue. So there's another example of where if the manager's not put into a situation where they can be successful and they're put into management for the wrong reasons, now that's another reason why that employee engagement occurs. And I think the last thing that we can just talk about is when you have those early conversations with your team, and there is an art to having that, right? Set those roles and responsibilities, establish the boundaries for accountability. How are we going to hold each other accountable? These are all the elements that, again, don't come out of a textbook, in most cases, but it's through the real life experience. And certainly I was not the single source of truth. What I tried to do is just make sure that everyone had the opportunity to understand different dynamics. And then from there, lean onto your peer managers, lean on your director for those additional insights to really help people be successful, starting with yourself. Because if you're successful as a manager, that's going to translate right back to your team.
Right. Right. Jeremy, Rhett, you guys have anything you want to add there?
I'm gonna fault you for handing it over to Mark on the coaching.
I was gonna say,
what in the world are we gonna add, Rhett?
Who gave Mark a Red Bull?
Gave it to the guy. It's his job first. We're like, I've done.
Well, to follow up with that,
sure.
Jeremy, I'll throw it back to you, Jeremy and Rhett. In your previous roles, when you were moved into management, what type of training did you receive? Because obviously it was the visionary, of Chris's that said, let's bring someone in to help you all, right? So in previous roles, what level of management training did you receive, and was it impactful?
Well, I think I can probably take a run at that, because I look at this area as one of two things, right? Leadership development for your leadership team, and leadership development opportunities you're providing to employees on your team, right? Which can be equally as valuable, building out a succession plan and introducing management concepts to folks that have never been in a management position before. Mm-hmm. I was a little bit hesitant when we brought you on board, Mark. I had just finished, not 2 years prior, my MBA program, had done all of the surveys and had gone through, I can't even count on one hand how many different leadership courses that they offered. I thought, well, shoot, what in the world is this smart guy going to have to offer us? And you know what? The one thing I really appreciated about the program beyond the Gallup assessment that we did, amongst the director peer group, and then ultimately down to our managers and the direct reports under them, right? It really helped give a good idea of where folks' strengths were, areas for improvement, what they responded well to. But even outside of that, just having a senior leadership or executive level ear to bounce ideas off of. Chris likes to throw that grandfather clock analogy at me, right? He wanted to know the time, and I didn't do the right discovery, right? So the next morning I handed him a grandfather clock, and he said, "Well, shit, I just wanted a stopwatch," right? For me, especially as I was kind of starting out, having somebody to bounce ideas off of, and presentations and proposals, and could you think of different ways to tweak this? Is there a better way to position this? That was great for me. So I think there's probably a nice fine line there between coach, mentor, colleague, peer, and I think that level of professional development, especially amongst new managers, can help elevate them from I've been put in a management position to I am a new leader within the organization, right? And I think there's a shift
Right.
there, because people can manage to accountability generally, but are they doing it well? Are they mentoring? Are they coaching? Are they really leading, right? People quit managers. I don't know that they leave leaders. I think they follow leaders around from company to company. So I don't know. I'm a big fan, and Mark, we got a ton of value out of the work you did with our organization, even amongst our peer group. I think one of the strongest elements that we had was that executive director level, where folks felt comfortable pulling up without senior leadership or without executive leadership present, and brainstorming ideas and talking about problems and sharing information. And I haven't seen that in every company that I work at. I think that's a struggle area for some companies, and bringing in an outside coach might be a way to open that door.
Thank you,
Yeah.
by the way. Now we're at 3-minute rebuttal. No,
Dude, Jiminy Christmas. I mean, obviously everything that they said is correct in what I would have said, but now we got to find a different layer here. Mark, to your question about, how prevalent or present was that type of coaching before you came around or anything like that? I'd say it was more of a just learn from your manager as much as you could about what effective management was, right? There wasn't really a formal process to it, or this is specifically why we do XYZ, or why we ask this question in this certain way. The different ways that you can get the best out of your team and your employees, which was a big thing that you and I always talked about was, we would have tons of changes or a new project or something like that. And you and I would cover, this is my strategy for how I think we can best motivate the team and get the most out of them. What do you think? What different angles have you heard of, thought of, coached, professionally learned, and being able to bounce that off you, and then later down the line have you meet with my team even and start building them out, I think added a lot of that concreteness to the natural abilities that you tend to find when you're looking for new managers, right? Giving them, hey, here are kind of the 6 plays you can run in an offense, right? Okay, let's start here, baby steps, and then we'll start throwing the ball. So for me, that was a big part of that, other than trying to just learn as much as possible from my managers as I continued to move up.
well, and again, I just helped execute the vision that Chris had, so we'll give him the last word here.
Well, I mean, starting with you and maybe working backwards, right? When I first came to our last organization, we hit that accelerated growth extremely quickly. And one of my biggest fears was I had a bunch of very talented and experienced people, and I didn't want them to cap out at where they could go with their potential. My worry was it wasn't that they weren't effective, it wasn't that they were smart, but the change was coming so quickly that I was worried that at $150 million or $200 million, they would just find people that had that experience and replace them out, rather than acknowledging that organic growth and that organic knowledge would be really powerful if it was combined with some leadership talent and leadership guidance, right? So that's where my initial thought came in, was really preserving the team. I adored everybody that I worked with, and I saw the potential there, but I also saw gaps in your team went from 2 people to 20. You don't have experience for that. It's not a character flaw, but we needed to bring in someone that could ask those questions, ask, what magic did you do today? You know, how do you communicate things in an effective, and we've talked about this in previous episodes about, you know, kind of being that a person that pushes back, but you do it with deference and respect, and, you know, make it objective, right? So those are the things that I think I saw we needed, but you were the catalyst to bring them to the table for the group at the time, right? And then we evolved it from there. But all of those things that I read, we did get that. I think that's why we stayed together as a group. I think that's why we're friends now still, because we came out of that with those understandings. Maybe one thing I'll say too about my past was back at Pearson, back when I first started and I was first put into a leadership position, we had to go through a leadership program. And at the time, it was run by Dr. Jeff Borden. And he taught us several things. He taught us all the things that were on that list, and things like enhanced self-awareness. It also taught us how to talk in front of people. When you do have a group, how do you say things and be reflective and recognize that what you say when you're at a certain level has impact? You know, when we talk about being an effective communicator, it isn't just communicating clearly, it's also being empathetic to recognize that your words carry weight, even if you don't think they're consequential, just having some of that awareness. So I'm very grateful that I got put through that, because in my previous roles, I was always at small businesses where you just got thrown into the deep end of the pool, and you know, you can't, you know, this, you figured it out, made a ton of mistakes along the way. And that's when I really started to fine tune my skill set. And I think I really found a place that I enjoyed in being a leader once it was better defined too. And I think whether you bring a coach in from the outside or you have that skill set internally, looking for those things, it has both quantitative and qualitative results to me. But now that's
insightful. I hadn't really put those two together, but you're right. I mean, for all intents and purposes, that senior leadership team went from 60 million to 660 million
in 5 years.
Yeah. And yeah, probably just under that.
Yeah, 4 years really, right?
Yeah. And generally you kind of run into that wall, right? That, what's the book we were referencing, the What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Right.
You know, there's generally kind of stops along the way, especially if you looked at it from a startup perspective. You know, the folks that get you from 0 to 50, you know, typically are replaced with the folks that get you from 50 to 500. And then they, you know, there's an additional team or a new team that comes in and scales you up above 500. And it probably is unique that senior leadership team was there for that, the entirety of that 10x growth.
Yeah, we never lost anybody, right? We all left over time for our own reasons, but we never lost anyone.
Right.
We never had to pull and replace, right? So I am proud of that. And I think a big part of that was building that in early, and everyone was kind of rowing in the same direction with Mark. I think it made a big difference. Rhett, I'm sorry I cut you off. You were going to say something.
No, you're fine. I was going to comment that I think a lot of what can kill companies that people don't realize when they maybe haven't been a part of it is growth, right? Growth can kill a company just as easily as stagnation. And so part of what I think made us capable to grow that quickly was that we were building our employees so well that we were maintaining knowledge and experience year over year over year. We had very little churn other than, you know, the expected churn, which was we're going to bring on 50 extra resources this summer. We're expecting 20 of them to be offboarded, and 20 of them would go, but then everyone else would want to stay on that team and build for the next 9 months to be ready for the solid 3. Now, busy season was every month of every year, which we figured out pretty quick, but it was supposed to be 3 months. But I guess the kind of Mark, you were asking me, of course, what's the magic? What's the magic we've done the last week? I kind of remembered one to this point was I started my one-on-ones with some of my new employees last week and just got great resounding. I'm so happy to be part of the company. This team seems so together. You seem like you genuinely care about building me and my growth within the company and where I can fit. And all of that builds back in part to your training and asking the right questions. And hey, what are your personal goals? Okay, how do those tie into the team goals? What do you want for the department? You know, this is a smaller team. Your decisions and progress have actual impact on how this grows within the next 9 months. So what do you think? Yeah, and just getting the reaction that you hope for from them, as far as like, I am so much more engaged in wanting to do my best work because of what you're doing as a manager, comes from learning these skills and potentially bringing in a professional to teach it to your managers, right?
Well, I think you touch on something there too, is that you took what you learned at a 650 person team. You had a team of, I don't know how many, 50 or whatever it was, and you've rolled it downwards into a team of 6 or 5, whatever the number is. It translates, right? And to your point, because you're starting with like, this is how we run things, this is how we lead, this is how we communicate from the get-go, you're building culture too by having that development, right? And by doing those mentoring, doing the one-on-ones, you're starting to build those things in. So I think it shows that those things translate and they can be very sticky at any size organization. They scale up and down.
Yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts on leadership development coaching? Nothing, Mark? Really? Okay. All right.
My colleagues.
All right, so
I think I see a couple more bullets below for him. I don't know.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, I've got a real doozy coming up on the next topic. So
Great. What's wonderful. All right, so let's talk about the next topic. The next topic is the benefits of professional development. The first one is skill enhancement, right? Employees acquire new skills or improve existing ones, increasing their value to the organization. It also leads to increased knowledge. Professional development expands the employees' knowledge base, making them more adaptable and versatile. Leads to improved performance. Upskilling leads to, I love that word, upskilling, by the way. Upskilling leads to better job performance and higher productivity. Enhanced employee engagement. Investing in an employee's growth fosters a positive work environment and boosts morale. Leads to attracting and retaining talent. And a commitment to professional development helps attract top talent and retain valuable employees. And organizational innovation. A skilled and knowledgeable workforce is better equipped to drive innovation and change. I think all of those are true. And when, a lot of things that we talk about on this podcast seem so obvious when you just read them or say them like that. But so many companies, so many groups don't do this. They don't invest in this. They don't think about those things. Quickly, and I don't mean to jump ahead, but I'm reading a book by Seth Godin. I don't know if you guys have ever read this, but it just kind of clicked with me. It's called The Song of Significance, right? And it kind of talks about that, about what culture do you want your company to be? Do you want a bunch of worker bees and drones, or do you want to have a hive that works together? And a big part of that is continually growing your team, allowing them to get new skills, even if it means they don't work for you. You're growing them and helping them go to other levels. And guys, we all have experience with that, but Rip, maybe I'll start with you first, if that's okay, so Mark doesn't take up everybody's ideas. Tell me a little bit about how that resonates with you, because we've all been through this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it hits on or builds on a lot of things we've already discussed a little bit through here, but for me, the benefits of professional development go hand in hand with keeping and developing your employees, right? Which is always a huge statement piece and issue for businesses. How do we keep talent, right? And like Mark was saying, a lot of the times it's okay, we need to pay them more, or we need to promote them, or we need to do this, right? Well, if you can do something like this and bring in professional development where they feel like they're gaining value and they're able to build their skill book. And like you said, take it from a 600-person team, a 50-person team to a 6-person company, and that I'm gaining a monetary amount, however much I want to apply to it. Let's say that leadership coaching was worth $20,000 to me that year. Like, this is a way that you can both build your team and keep your team while also giving something that isn't just a raise over and over and over again. And all of a sudden they're at the top of your range of what you can pay that person for that position. Right.
Right.
I think there's an interesting point there.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. Jeremy?
Oh, this is I get really excited about this topic. And if there's one thing, gosh, how long was I was with Pearson for 8 years. If there's one thing I'll take away from that company till the day I die, it's that always learning mantra.
Yeah.
And they stood by it. God love them. I got my PMP, my CSM 1, 2, and 3, my ITIL, my ITSM, my MBA.
Yeah.
They truly live that mantra. And I've tried to carry that forward. And to Rhett's point, not every company is willing to invest in that. I've had great experiences going to bat for my team and saying I need X amount allocated in the budget for professional development. And I want to say, Rhett, did you get your PMP through the? I'm trying to remember.
No.
No. Oh
Real.
no, I put him on the spot. Delete that out.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I think you went through the course of study though, which was
I did.
awesome.
I did. Yes. Yep.
But I love to be able to go to my leadership team and have them go to the individual contributors and say, hey, I want you to have everybody build in a personal professional development goal for the year, right? What do they want to focus on? Where do they want to be? Those cross-departmental career ladders that we built that help give folks a roadmap between, hey, I'm in customer success and I'd really like to get into sales, or I'm in support and I'd like to get into data engineering and work on student data that we get from the districts. All of that coexisted with a list of requirements. If you want to get in that job, here's what you need. And making those opportunities available for folks, I think, I'm sure I'm not speaking out of turn, contributed to that 98+% retention rate we had.
Absolutely.
I want to say when I left, 48 managers and 46 of them had been internal promotions.
Yeah.
That wasn't an accident. We provided for that development and that growth. And one of the key look fors I have when I'm interviewing with folks is, do they ask, whether professional development opportunities are available to them? I think it shows initiative. Are you talking with somebody or looking for somebody on your team that wants to expand their skill set? And I think for a lot of leaders, that's difficult because, if they do, they grow up and they're not going to be on that team forever. But I think we miss out on some really top talent and some top performers if we're not willing to say, okay, I'm willing to risk coaching this person up. And if we don't have a management position ready when they're ready for it, then they're going to leave. That's a risk I'm willing to take.
Right.
And those are folks that'll come work for you again in the future. Hell, those are folks that you might go work for yourself in the future. But I really think investing in your folks. And if you're not able to get budget, there's so many free options that are available. We built options out in Salesforce, all those trailhead trainings.
Yeah, that's right.
Our data entry team, right, to go through. We had people that were, 45, 48, 52 different trailhead certifications and, no cost. We used to do book clubs, optional book clubs for folks that wanted to come in, once a week on Wednesday afternoons and chat about the book du jour. Those things are cost free, and still can show the folks that work for you that you're invested in their, professional growth, that you're behind them, that you're pushing them. And whether they want to jump into a leadership position or not, the fact that you value what they're doing enough to help coach them to the next level, I think will just carry forward forever. So I couldn't be a higher proponent for this.
Yeah, Jeremy, I think you hit on something big there, which is interesting. Being a leader is how important being selfless can be sometimes, right? Because on those conversations and those one-on-ones that I've had, something that Mark taught us that has really stuck with me is one of my biggest accomplishments that I can have is if you get a promotion, or you get to go to a different team, or you get a job offer from another company, like I'll be the first one to write your letter of rec. That's my job as your coach and as your supervisor. It is not to keep you in this one position doing this one job so that, that's not, I think that's a big misunderstanding of how you build stability and structure within a company that can grow with a company, right? Because those types of people, when it does come time to move quick and dive head first and pick up new things, if you've kept them pigeonholed, either they're not going to want to do it or they're not going to be able to do it because you haven't been trained. So I think that's a big point that you kind of hit on there. Yeah.
Well, and Mark, I know you've got some things to talk about here, but 2 points that you guys made. One is, and we've talked about this in earlier episodes too, is leading by fear instead of success, right? And if you're fear-based and you're worrying that people are going to leave if you make them more talented, you're shortchanging yourself. And what you said, Red, is if you have someone who goes to another department, especially within a company, if they move within companies, sometimes that's some of the best things that can happen, is because you now have an evangelist that's within that group that can show people what your experience is and bring that perspective. And we had that happen at our last organization where, hell, we populated probably a quarter of the different departments because we did train people really well. And they went into other departments and brought that insight of, this is what it looks like from that side of the fence, right? So I think there's lots of upside to that. And Jeremy, to your point, there's lots of no cost and low cost ways of doing things, but it does lead to growth. I mean, I have my PMP, my CAP, or CSM 1, 2, and 3. I have all the exact same things you do. They helped me at that company, and they helped me outside of that company. And by me being helped outside of that, I brought you over. Mark came over at some point. I think I ended up bringing 15 or 18 people over the course of the years from just Pearson. And then probably another dozen or so people from outside the company who knew me through those people or were friends. We were able to grow them. And then that kind of like it snowballed into this knowledge cluster that came. We took all of this great knowledge and brought it to another place, right? So all of that came out of these steps that happened in our previous parts of our career. Mark, I'm sorry. I know you've got some talking points on this.
I was just saying, those all-star contributors aren't going to follow somebody that's not been invested in their success, right? So that's telling.
I like to think so. I mean, I think it was one of those things where I genuinely care about people, but and I think people can see that if you don't, right? But there was an investment in them, and there was an opportunity. Selfishly, it helped me grow my department faster. I had known quantities. You were one of the first people I brought over because I trusted you, right? I mean, you and I had worked together for 4 or 5 years when I brought you over to Amplify in a bigger role, but I knew what your skill set was, right? And then you grew it from there, and then you brought on great people like Rhett, and they grew their teams, and we're seeing all of those things propagate outward, right? So I mean, to me, when you look at it as a group, when you talk about things like this, these things in discrete conversations sound very small, but hopefully as you're listening to this podcast, you see kind of what the benefits were over the course of time for all of us.
Yeah. One relationship at a time,
right.
Just building and building and building.
That's right. Go ahead, Mark. I'm sorry.
No. And, I'm just continuing on that theme. When I did come over and was entrusted with building out a training and development team, I was the beneficiary of strong people from Rhett's group and Bill's group and, John's group that started the foundation. And so then when we had other opportunities within, I think it was 6 weeks, the one employee that I had hired was all of a sudden transferred over to our faculty support team because her subject matter expertise was in math. I didn't need her to be a trainer. I needed her to focus for our customers as a math subject matter expert and who was bilingual. That immediately jumped into those areas. So right when you talked about the selflessness, those are things that were all learned. So, but kind of wrapping a little bit of a bow on I'll say the individual employee development. And, Jeremy made a great point. There's a lot of things for free. And I also tell people, for the cost of a team happy hour, not that I want to get rid of team happy hours. I can do a 90-minute, overview and assessment of a team and all their strengths and their working geniuses.
Mhm.
So it's not a expense. I'm not a blue chip, consulting firm charging, $400 an hour, needless to say, but there are very cost-effective ways to at least start that.
Mhm.
So I'll just say, I want to focus now more on our cross-generational challenges and where that development really can, come into play for others. A McKinsey report, earlier this year said that Gen Zs, and even to a point, the Ys and the younger millennials, they view professional development in their top three. They want jobs that are meaningful. They want that professional development. And on one hand, money is not in the top three, it's number 4. So that just reinforces the fact that as we're now working with 6 generations, or I should say there are 5 generations, but they're now splitting up the millennials from either younger millennials or older millennials. So I think if you're under 35, or 38, you're considered a younger millennial, versus over 38, you're considered an older millennial before you get to the Gen Xers. So from that perspective, as everyone's looking at building these multi-generational teams, how can you drive that? Now, my pain right now is in September, the end of September, Fortune came out with an article, and it stated how many Gen Zs are now being fired within their first 30, 60, 90 days from managers, because those managers view that they're unprepared for the work environment. And I've worked with, from my alma mater, a lot of Gen Zs. They're phenomenal. They're great. And I think, like everything else, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. They'll say Gen Zs are going to be the first ones to quit if they don't like the environment, and at the same time, well, how did you advertise that environment? How did you advertise your culture? Because yes, if people aren't experiencing the culture that you say you have, of course, now they're going to leave much quicker. So again, I think there's a lot of elements of accountability on both sides, on the side of a manager, the side of the employee, right? What were those accountability conversations up front? What did you agree upon? What did I say? This is the value I'm going to bring, and this is what I need from you as a manager. And if I don't see that, how am I going to be reminding you, and vice versa? So I think, at the end of the day, if you're giving people that opportunity to grow, that's going to overcome some little hiccups along the way. But if you're not giving them growth, if you're not giving them direction, a lot of times people probably feel like, wow, I just hired, 6 people for my department. I'll let the training department worry about it. And then I just want to manage the results.
Right.
Well, if you're not working along with them, and if you see some early warning signs and you're not getting to what I would say are the behavioral issues, numbers don't tell the whole truth. Early on in my career, it was easy for someone to say, Mark, you're 70% of quota. Well, what are the 5 things that are happening that's making me 70% of my quota? And if I'm not doing the prospecting calls, I'm not getting in front of customers, I'm not asking good discovery questions, that's the reason why. And that's the coaching that I think people really need. And again, I think every generation is going to be open to that collaboration in the spirit of, I want you to be successful. And in many cases, it was like, I want you to be so successful, I want to report to you someday.
Right.
Sure.
We're all going to report to Red. But
And that's the tie-in, right? That people want to work for you. Because I think the most risky proposition is to have a manager or somebody in a leadership position that is able to drive really good, solid results. But if you took a peek at their team, 80% of them would quit tomorrow for a comparable opportunity, right? And I think that poses the biggest challenge and maybe the biggest opportunity, right? From a coaching perspective, that person would take far less work, right? Than maybe somebody that was struggling to drive results. But in my experience, and I've had some phenomenal leaders and I've had some really, really bad ones. The bad ones that are able to drive results, they don't tend to get addressed, right? And you have to kind of look through a magnifying glass to get to a root problem. There is, folks are leaving, they're not happy, employee satisfaction is down, retention is down.
Right.
How come people don't want to work for this individual? And I wish companies would focus a little bit more on that, because it's, to your point, you want folks that would follow you around, that would, that want to grow, that want to be the kind of leader that they're seeing in you. Otherwise, it's just a rough work environment. So I think it works both ways. It's kind of an interesting lens to look at it through.
And adding on to your point, Jeremy, one of the more recent studies, here maybe 3 months ago, I'll say in the early summer timeframe, Gallup said the average cost to replace a manager is 80% of their salary. To replace an individual contributor is 40% of their annual salaries. I spoke to an executive recruiter about a month ago, and they, I'll say, just challenged me on that, saying, oh no, it's at least 2 to 2.5x that amount of money. So because they also then took into consideration, if I have a manager that leaves, and if they were a bad manager, what is that ripple effect? What's that avalanche effect of other people that were leaving as well? There's a situation I heard the other day that there was a toxic work environment for an employee. They left, but on their exit interview, and they spoke to a very senior leader, all of a sudden they were like, well, you know what? If this person is gone, would you come back? Because obviously they weren't the first person to leave for that reason. So there's a lot of elements along the way. And I think, again, a lot of it is HR can do a wonderful job at providing the programs, but if it's not supported by management and middle management and senior leaders, then it's just a lot of, quote, nice things that they're checking a box on.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's all right. All right, let's move on to our last section, which is key considerations for implementing leadership development and professional development. The first one is align with organizational goals. Ensure development initiatives support the company's strategic objectives. Identify development needs. Conduct needs assessments to determine the specific skills and knowledge gaps. Offer a variety of options. Provide a range of development opportunities to cater to different learning styles and preferences. Measure impact. I think this one's super important. Track the ROI, or return on investment, of development programs to demonstrate their effectiveness. And create a culture of learning. Foster a workplace that encourages continuous learning and growth. I can tell you, like at the company I'm at now, we are just in the development stage of creating organizational goals, but we still have a direction. So, if you're listening and your company doesn't have some of these things, you can start to build these things out anyway. You can still, even if you don't necessarily do a needs assessment, by talking to people, who needs some growth. I've got some folks that are very intelligent, very passionate, but they struggle with delegation. They struggle with, different parts, or they've learned organically about their role. So finding them some things that they can do from a more formal level, even if it's just finding them a book to start with and you talk about it on your one-on-ones, even starting there can start you on the road to professional development and leadership growth. Mark, I'll start with you on this one.
I wasn't prepared for that. No. So I wanted Jeremy to go first.
Jeremy can go first. I don't care.
No, I'll be glad to go. So again, I think, one of the better, just looking at those goals and establishing them, a story from a previous organization was I worked with my HR business partner, and we identified 10 attributes that were really the price of admission to be part of our team. So it was almost like, all right, everyone has these 10, or else most likely they wouldn't be on the team. I wouldn't have hired them, or they wouldn't have passed through, the gauntlet of interviews that we went through to bring on our account managers. Then what we did is we put together another 8 attributes of, okay, what would really bring them from good to great? And then we sat down as a team, we walked through those, and then I let them choose what 3 they wanted to focus on, because not everyone's always in the same place. And so it was that customized learning that we did in being able to say, okay, what's going to elevate you? And everyone I'd say 80% of everyone came back to me saying this was the best training because it was stuff that I wanted to achieve. I wanted to, really enhance my skill sets on. And from that perspective, we did everything from we identified the needs, we gave them the options, they were bought in, they were held accountable, in their sessions and in our one-on-ones, we talked about, okay, what did you learn, since your last session? How are you applying it today? And so we really developed, and, Jeremy said it best, earlier, this was the company whose, one of their mantras was always learning. And so from that perspective, it just drove the, I'll say employee engagement. It drove a high retention level on the team, and ultimately our customers benefited, from that.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh, no, I was just going to say the only criticism I would have of that list is I'd put the create a culture for learning at the top.
Yeah,
and
probably.
I think that works metaphorically and figuratively, right? If it's not coming from the top down of an organization, if you're having monthly town hall or quarterly town hall meetings and we're not celebrating the wins for folks on our team that got the new certification or got the promotion or moved up, right? Like all of that kind of tracks up to the top. So I put that up at the top of the list, that culture for learning. And there can be costs associated with that. That's got to be approved from the top down, right? Is it financially, are we investing in our folks, in our leadership team, and our individual contributors? Once you've got that buy-in at the top of the company, I think all the other ones, do they align with organizational goals, identify the needs, offer a variety of options? I really like the measure and impact, because I wonder how many companies actually do that, of, in terms of measuring maybe the number of folks that are taking advantage of those personal professional development opportunities, and how long are they staying with the company? Are they applying for and getting internal promotions or movement? I think that'd be a really neat thing. And I wonder where that falls for measurement, maybe the HR department. But my guess would be there's not enough data and statistics behind it to really incentivize companies that says, hey, you know what, if we give each of our department heads 10 grand this year or 20 grand this year to offer, a variety of options. So we used to say you could get your PMP, you could get your CAPM, you could get your Six Sigma. What type of learning would you like to do this year? And I'd like to see that offered more, but otherwise I really like the list, Chris. I think it'd be an interesting conversation to sit down and stew about. Okay, if there's a company that doesn't have a program like this in place, how do you get that initial traction? Is it a groundswell, bottom up? But I don't think it can succeed without being a top-down priority.
I agree, but I think to your point too, if it's not there, I think at different levels can introduce it. And I think that's where the measure impact comes in. It doesn't necessarily have to be this big weighty thing, but if I get $250 so I can buy everybody a book, how do I measure that $250 provided value to the company? It wasn't just throwing $250. Start there, because you might be able to build it from the bottom up and say, I proved this. Now I want $2,000. Another department now wants to start a book club, right? So I hear you, and I think it needs to be an initiative as a company initiative, but where it doesn't exist, the company just might not be developed to that point. There might not be necessarily it's a reluctance. It's just they haven't gotten there, but like I've got somebody on my team, just quickly, Mark, somebody on my team who is in a services position, and he would love to go into more development. But I talked to the CTO, and he's like, his skill sets, it would take him 2 years to get there. And I'm like, okay, well, in 2 years, what would he need to do? And so we're putting together some certificate plans for him to do. And, it's inexpensive. These are not expensive courses,
right.
But it was also both a symbolic gesture for him, like, stay with me. We're going to find a way, whether it's here or somewhere else, we're going to start putting out, I want to feed into that passion for you. And, he's really engaged with us now. And we've actually started building out tech support, right? Because why not in services? And he's, I'm kind of putting him in a place where he can start leading that. And it's starting to get him to think from his own perspective too, that perhaps his path that he was building for himself was too narrow, right? So it kind of, again, to me, it's like that snowball effect, that those are just small things, but he's my evangelist now for being at the company only a few months. Like, hey, tell Chris what you want to do. He's actually interested and may help you get there, right? So again, I'm not saying it that I have this nefarious plan, but it does tend to bring you benefit. It isn't just unilateral. It is bi-directional if you look at it the right way.
Oh, 100%. And I forget to give Mark kudos for the Jim Collins reference.
And the one point I was going to add on to is this is where senior leadership can also start to say, if I go and say, hey, I want $10,000 from training, well, start to create that culture of, oh, how are you going to measure success? How are you going to measure the impact? And again, there's that soft and hard dollar cost. But again, when you start thinking in those lines, then anything else you start to ask for, you're always in the back of your mind saying, how am I going to justify this? And what's the benefit? How are we going to measure? And how will I give quarterly updates? Hey, my quarterly update is, Chris, I've retained all 15 people on my team. My semi-annual update is, I've retained all 15 people on my team. There's a value and a cost to that. So
I think
I probably cut you off.
there might even be an intangible there. I got my first leadership position. I'll give kudos to Mr. T for hiring me into it, but I was bringing a lot of what I was learning in my MBA program back to the job. What was that? It was that seasonally adjusted regression analysis, right? To try to predict support volume. I think when you build that culture of learning, folks are going to organically do that. If they're part of a book club and it's got some really great ideas, they're going to bring those back to the team. If they're doing a new certification program or a new class, they're going to bring that back to the group. And I think that spurs that continual improvement and that innovative, the innovation process, right? That gets people really thinking about new ways to do things and kind of removes well, that's the way it's always been done from our vocabulary, because we're focusing on that learning.
And if I had to pay Chris every time I said, you're stepping over $1 to pick up a nickel, he'd probably be on a beach in Tahiti right now. So,
Well, we've started a new criticisms board at the new company, so the terms are alive and well.
Oh boy!
Do we leave
Red,
Red out
any
of that?
thoughts on this one?
Go ahead, Jeremy.
No, I was going to say the same thing. Do we leave Red out of the key considerations there?
No, I think my addition here is, overall, I think every company should consider what leadership and professional development they're currently invested in, not just monetarily like we're talking about. It doesn't have to be that you're going to pump $20,000 into leadership development. Right. What time are you putting into it? What sessions are your managers currently doing? That book club that Jeremy's mentioning, or that, instead of every other week, instead of the just happy hour, you have some type of development course or leadership course, or bring someone in. I think there's a lot of non-expensive options that you can start looking into, especially if you're having internal strife or issues with churn or anything like that. Consider this as one of your potential options that can help you with that. Another point here, what we may want to look at maybe on a future episode that would benefit managers is how do you go about measuring the success or show the value of this, right? We already have that one value of retention. Hey, you don't lose anyone over the course of a year, and that in the previous year, you lost 50% of your team. Awesome. But what else can you do, right? When you're talking about those goals that you're developing with them, hey, we want to really get organized this year. Okay, well, one of your stats can be, hey, this year we developed and created 250 processes across the company that are now shared with the sales team and everyone else, so that everyone is on the same page. And what that has allowed us to do is to operate much more efficiently, and there's far less confusion between the teams. That value in part came from your leadership development and your professional development, right? I think it's interesting to think of those, because you don't think of a process document as a number type of thing, right? You're like, oh, we just created a process document. That's what you do. All right, well, how many did you create the previous year? 0, because you're already 100% up on
Right.
something you're looking
You've already
into.
doubled your output.
Yeah. And to this kind of point here, as we're talking about it, I figured I'd go ahead and provide some of the questions that I have on my one-on-ones and how I'm kind of working on developing my employees, to give the listeners kind of an idea of a way that you can go about asking these questions. And this isn't the full list by any means, but it's something you can always start with. What accomplishments are you most proud of, and how can we build upon them? What skills do you want to develop or improve? What resources or support do you need to reach your goals? How do your personal goals align with the team's objectives? How will we measure your progress? What goals do you have for the department as a whole? What is the timeline for completing these goals? How can the team support you in reaching your goals? And how will achieving these goals impact your role in the team? Again, this is not you could ask those questions 10,000 different ways, and feel free to, but that type of idea or getting started, I think, can be really beneficial. So figured I'd share some of those.
It's opening the door to the conversation, right?
Right.
Well, and it makes it, like we were talking about earlier, it makes it bi-directional. It isn't just either what the company can do for you or what we expect from you, but bi-directionally, how do we incorporate where you want to go with where the company's going, right? I think that's really smart. And again, it shows you can do that at any size organization with any group of people. You can do it with one, or you can do it with 1,000. All of these skills translate. And I think that's the exciting part to me, is it's not like, well, when you get to this point, we bootstrapped crap for years. We didn't have any money to do anything, right? I mean, we did. We just threw
Google
things
Docs,
together
right?
and hoped
How many
for the
Google
best.
Docs? Oh, yeah.
Right? But we did it, and you know, as the budgets got bigger, as we were able to do things more professionally, we leaned into that. But we knew what we wanted. We just had to figure out sometimes how to do it. And you know, last point, when we were talking about the book club, Jeremy, one of the things that this was your idea, and I still, to this day, I think it was such a smart idea, because you incorporated a different type of learning into the book clubs, was we had everybody present a chapter, and they had to use a different presentation tool. So if somebody used PowerPoint, you couldn't use it again. It had to be something else. And I think you found 2 or 3 that I'd never heard of any of this stuff, right? I think it was one of the first times I saw like a Kanban board or something, but it
You had the
forced you to be
cartoon one.
What's that?
You had the cartoon one. The cartoon one
I did
was
have the
cool.
card. That's right. That's right. But I mean, we all learned a little bit there. That is also professional development. That's also leadership development. So don't get pigeonholed into this. You've got to hire $100,000 consultant. If you can, start small, prove the point, use the measures to say, you know, you hit it right on the head. It doesn't necessarily have to be monetary too. What's the impact can be monetary, but it can also be process improvement. It can be quality improvement. It can be efficiency improvements, all kinds of things. Happiness quotient goes up with your team, right? They're happier employees, so they stay. There's all kinds of ways to do this. So anyway, any final thoughts on that, gentlemen, before we wrap her up for the evening?
No, so we basically decided it's a good thing, right?
I think so. I know sometimes we can be a little ambiguous when we get started on a topic, but you know,
we're big fans here.
That's right. That's right. So, you know, to close it out, by investing in leadership development, coaching, and professional development, organizations and teams can cultivate a high-performing workforce, build a strong leadership pipeline, and achieve long-term success, which I think we've spoken to. We've given examples, you know, all of that. You know, when we talk about this stuff on this podcast, everybody, we're speaking to each other. You know, it really is from the heart. It's genuine. These are our experiences, and I find it fascinating every time we do this, that we can, you know, we have experience in so many of these things, and it's not just this formal work, but anybody can learn from these things, right? So I hope us telling our stories, and some of us pontificate more than others, but you know, hopefully you get something out of it and there's some value there. I hope Jeremy's over on that side, not me. All right. And with that, With that, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Generational Exchange. As always, we hope the conversation between these generations sparks some new ideas and help you see the business world from fresh perspectives. Please don't forget to subscribe if you're new for more insightful discussions across the generations. And if you have a burning business question or you'd like to be a guest on our show, just as a kind of a teaser coming up, we have about 5 people in the pipeline that we're going to be interviewing that are different business leaders from across the business spectrum. So make sure you're listening for that. It's going to be very exciting. And they found us at our email, which is cmsrconsulting@gmail.com. So until next time, from all of us here at the Generational Exchange, as always, thank you for listening and happy learning.